Words are currency. And no matter who you are, whether you're a scientist, a CEO, or an author like me, your words will determine how much influence and impact you have. If you're the CEO of a company, chances are you've got your words up on the wall in a mission statement of your organization. Oftentimes, I walk into a company and I see those words that are the leader's vision for what an organization will be. Those words, the mission statement, are a foundational tool that say, this is the heartbeat of our organization, and these words are what we want you to communicate to the world, whether it's our customers or our prospects or internally. So words are very important in business and certainly in life. And whether you're Apple and you're thinking differently or you're Nike just doing it, the words that you define your business to be will tell people a little bit and a lot about who you are and what you sell. Okay? On a personal level, of course, we know the impact of words. Words can build and words can destroy. Words can strengthen and words can weaken and break. In your relationships, a word can strengthen and build up how you relate to your children, how you relate to your loved ones, your colleagues, your friends. Leaders of a nation can start or stop wars with words. So words are very important. And I'm going to challenge you today to think of words differently than perhaps you normally do. And by the time you walk out into that world, you'll realize that words are actually an asset even greater than diamonds, gold, or the dollars in our bank account. Words are that important that they can change a life and maybe even save a life. What words do you say to yourself in your self-talk? And what words do you say to others, maybe intentionally or unintentionally? And what happens when you're at a loss for words? I found myself in that situation before I became an author. I was an emergency response team leader with an airline, and I worked an airplane crash in which we had hundreds of passengers on board. And it was my role as I flew down to the crash site, it was my role to work with family members and try to give them comfort in a situation where really there could be no comfort. And at that moment, I stood there facing this family that had this little boy. And as I looked into his eyes, I realized that my thousands of dollars of corporate sales training really didn't matter. And I leaned forward, and I was just at a loss for words. And the little boy reacted by spitting on me and yelling at me in anger. And he had this hatred, this rage inside him like an adult. And when I left that role in the airline industry and crisis management, that little boy stayed with me forever. And I never wanted to be without words again. And so I began writing books. And I vowed that I was only going to write books that were inspirational and that would change or even possibly save lives. And throughout this process, I also started a writer's workshop at homeless shelters. And I would teach the homeless how to go inward and find their own words, and then also how to write down the story of their lives. At the homeless shelter, I met this little boy with these beautiful brown eyes. And as I looked into his eyes, I remembered that other little boy, the day that I didn't have the right words. And I walked over to this little boy and I put my hand on him and I said, "You are a mighty king. You can do anything you want to do in this world, and you can be anything you want to be." And this little boy was standing in line with some gang members that I had worked with before in my writer's workshop. And so I felt the sadness inside because I knew that his day was likely going to be filled with a lot of negativity and destruction. But when I walked away, I knew that I had given him that asset of words within my heart, and that maybe my words would have an impact. I really didn't know how or if, and I never would know. But I did walk away with a feeling that my words probably could transform his life and that one day he would remember them. About a week later, I found myself sitting face to face across the desk from a CEO that I was writing a book for. And as he told me his story, he began to weep. And the CEO was a very wealthy, prominent man with jets and multiple houses and cars and a life and family and kids. And as he began to weep, he told me about how his father had abandoned him and how that led him on a path of rage and addiction, and how he had lashed out at his own family and was so distraught about hiding all of this that he was about to leave his family and repeat that cycle again. And as I sat there looking at the CEO, I knew that in that moment I had the choice. He was my client, but I knew I had to step out on the ledge and I had to offer him the words in my heart that would make a difference. And so I gave him a journal and I walked him through the same process that I had walked many homeless people through, which was to go deep into the soul and start writing stories about his life, looking back. And then I encouraged him to also write out stories for his children that would end up being a legacy about his life. So instead of inward focus and all that conflict, he was able to begin writing stories and letters to his children. Now, when I left his office, I had this pit in my stomach about how he must have been feeling, but I knew that I had left him with my words straight from my heart that could catalyze transformation in his life. Now, an hour after that, I found myself sitting at a homeless shelter teaching my writer's workshop, face to face with a homeless man who began to weep as he told me the story about how his father had abandoned him. He started down the path of drugs and addiction and rage. And I couldn't believe I was hearing the exact same story that I had heard in the corner office in the high-rise an hour before. And as I listened to the homeless man, I gave him the same words and I walked him through the same process. And I thought, here's the CEO and the homeless man, and yet both of them are the same. And we're all connected by pain. And one of the things I observed through all of this as I continued to do this throughout the years is that humans are three parts. We're mind, body, and soul. And in the homeless shelters, but also in the corporate boardrooms in normal America and all over the globe, that when people are suffering, oftentimes they were focusing on the mind or the body, but neglecting the thing that's unseen, which is the soul. And so it was my observation in many cases that humans, if we have an issue in the mind, we can go get psychology or medication. If we have an issue in the body, we can go see a physician and get treatment. But if we have an issue in the soul, oftentimes people didn't recognize it. So, I'm in the business of words, right? And a word, when it comes into the mind, often settles in the heart. Sometimes, if it's toxic or negative, creates a bondage rooted in the soul. So how many of us walk around with negative words or experiences or trauma that has rooted in the soul, creating some sort of bondage? And the one consistent thing that I observed over and over again in this program with the homeless was that we could unlock that bondage in the soul and they could get freedom and restoration. And when we walked them through this process of using a journal and writing out the story of their lives, not only did it give them a purpose, but it connected them with the world, and we found that the CEO and the homeless person could be connected in the very same way through the power of words. So there was restoration on both sides, and it worked. And the outcome was transformation, restoration of families, homeless men writing books, CEOs mentoring the homeless and then changing themselves in the process, and sometimes even the executives even learn more than the homeless people. And it was a process that through multiplication turned into a phenomenal program. And I began to look at it as, wait a minute, we can mirror companies like Tom's giving away shoes, or Roma Boots doing boot drops, and we began doing book drops. So throughout this entire process, now we do book drops on the street and in homeless shelters, and we teach men, women, and children the process of writing, which evolves into life skills because it gives them, through the power of words, a purpose in their life. Now, the other thing we do is we bring homeless men and women into the writing process so that they can work on the books. And the outcome was phenomenal. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge today. And the challenge is, if you view your words as an asset, then you realize that words can change a life, right? Not only your own life, but someone else's. So what are you saying inside yourself? Are you using positive, empowering words? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that my own father committed suicide when I was 7. And I remember standing with an Italian publisher who had published one of my books, and I remember she said, "It seems to me like you're trying to rewrite your story. It seems to me you're constantly trying to help other people and pull them off that cliff." And maybe, but I realized that what if somebody had been there at that final hour? What if someone had gone in and said the words that could have pulled him back out of that mood or off that cliff? Sometimes the person sitting next to us in our office or our neighbor or in the grocery store is suffering with something that we're not even aware of. And so your words have an incredible power, not just in business or on Twitter or on Facebook or on text. Your words have the power to change or even possibly save a life. So my challenge to you today is, think of yourself as an inspirational speaker, because you are. You are a motivational speaker, and your words can save a life.